first horses were brought to Australia 200 years ago as beasts of burden and loyal friends. Having served their purpose, they were turned loose, and today hundreds of thousands of horses run wild across the country. The wild horse was branded outlaw and called the Brumby. Native animals have to share the land with the Brumbies. Horses, one of our most loved animals, are now damaging the natural environment and driving wildlife to extinction. Australia's outback resembles the primeval grassland home of the ancient horse, and here the Brumby has been most successful. This land, which never felt the tread of the prehistoric horse, now has more wild horses than any other continent on Earth. In the arid regions, they dig for water in a dried-up creek bed. In the same season, 3,000 kilometres away, others forage for grass beneath alpine snow. When most Australians think of Brumbies, they think of the wilderness of the Snowy Mountains. The land of the Snowy River bred wiry horses and tough horsemen that earned a place forever in Australian folklore. Here the word Brumby found its way into the language, and the wild bush horse found its way into the hearts of Australians. Brumbies of the Snowy Mountains are descended from stock horses that found their way into the high country. For more than 100 years, horsemen of the Snowy Mountains have gone after the Brumbies to capture the best of the mob. Today, a few mountain horsemen keep alive the tradition of running the Brumbies. The bush tradition of hard riding is kept alive today when the rodeo comes to town. The rodeo is a conflict of admiration for the beauty and wildness of the animal, and a determination to break its spirit. Under scrutiny as a violation of the rights of animals. It is the issue of animal rights that is drawing world attention to the fate of Australia's wild horses.
Before I came along, there was very little research on feral horses in Australia.
Works for the Conservation Commission of the Northern Territory, studying wild horses and their impact on the environment. Dave and assistant Will Dobby dart stallions to put radio tracking collars on them.
The drug works very quickly, about 1.5 minutes between darting and the time the horse goes to sleep. You have to work very quickly to get the collar on. The radio tracking collar has a transmitter which sends a radio signal to a receiver so that you can follow the horse round. You've got about 5 minutes between the time the horse goes to sleep and when he wakes up. For the first few years of this project, I worked by myself. Now I've got Will, and we work together on the project, which makes things much easier.
The stallion joins his family group, which can now be tracked through the roughest country. They can locate collared stallions up to 20 kilometres away.
The best guess for the total number of horses in Australia is about 300,000, but there could be 600,000. No one really knows just how many there are. The basic difference between a wild horse and a domestic one is that wild horses hardly ever come in contact with humans. We have to go 200 kilometres from here to see the nearest person. This is a very big land. I've grown up with horses, and I trained as a biologist at university. When I came up to work here on the Brumbies, I brought my show jumpers. Combining my love of horses and biology, when I'm studying them, I have to spend days and days out living the life of a feral horse almost. You give your horse a drink at the waterhole and then you walk out along the track towards where the Brumbies are feeding. Your horse sniffs the dung piles, just like a Brumbie does. And he whinnies looking for his mate, just like a Brumbie does. You get a really good idea of what it's like to be a Brumbie. One of the most limited resources in the arid zone of Australia is water. And that's why waterholes are very important for feral horses. They have to drink every 24 hours, or sometimes they're away from water up to 40 hours. When they're in drinking, they run into other horses, and that's where all the exciting behaviour happens. Horses are not territorial in the true sense of the word. Stallions don't keep other stallions out of an area. They do, however, keep other stallions away from their mares.
In arid regions, Brumbies are forced to share waterholes. Dominant stallions maintain a constant vigil to prevent young stallions stealing their mares or fillies. If threats don't discourage other males and a stallion wants to avoid a fight, he rounds up his females and drives them from the waterhole.
Horses can be found in two main types of groups. There's a family group, which is made up of a stallion, his mares and their offspring. And there are bachelor groups, which are the young males, which are kicked out of their family groups when they're about 2 years old. Bachelors will come together for a while and then break up and form other groups. Whereas the family groups, harem groups, can be very stable. Mares and stallions can stay together for years. During spring, the breeding season, it must be a very nerve-wracking time for a stallion. He has to take his mares into the waterhole and fight off all the other stallions who try to pinch his mares. If a stallion's a bit worried about losing his mare, he's very cautious about coming in to drink. The stallions appear to avoid fights as far as possible. They use bluff. They stamp their foot and show off, bow their neck and say, "Look, I'm tough, I'm looking after these mares, here you go away." However, if the other stallion doesn't go away and the bluff doesn't work, fights do eventuate, and most of the stallions during the breeding season have scars all over their bodies.
We can only guess at what horses are thinking, but they say a lot with body language. A black stallion with a harem warns off a young bachelor. An older and more seasoned bachelor darts in for an attack. The black horse has to fend off aggressors from two directions. The bay horse attacks again. The two bachelors confront each other, but the younger one is not prepared to fight. Dung is used by horses as a sign of dominance, and a younger male adds insult to injury. The mares await the outcome. The black stallion tries to round up his harem, but the older bachelor stands in his way. The black horse is driven off, and a new master claims the harem. Australia's native animals have to share food, shelter and water with the Brumbies. Birds can fly to other water, but many animals depend on one supply. 200 horses drinking every day in summer is a big drain. Brumbies live on vast cattle stations and compete for food, with millions of head being fattened for world markets. To most cattlemen, the feral horse is a pest that eats into their profits. There are few parasites and little disease in the dry outback, and no predators of large grazing animals. Dingoes occasionally kill defenceless foals and feed off sick and dying horses. Parts of Australia were once used for breeding war horses, and many fine-looking Brumbies are their descendants. From the 1840s, cavalry horses were bred for the expansion of Great Britain's colonial empire. During the First World War, tens of thousands were shipped away to toil in the mud of Flanders and in the desert sands of the Middle East. First bred in New South Wales, the Whaler became one of the world's most superior cavalry horses. In 1917, the Australian Light Horse, mounted on Whalers, took part in the last great cavalry charge in military history. They spurred full gallop at Turkish cannon to take the town of Beersheba in Palestine. 120,000 Australian horses went to the First World War, never to return. Australia also bred heavy war horses by crossing with draft horses. They were used for pulling artillery and supplies. Horses came face to face with mechanised war. Even when tanks bogged down, the animals would carry on. But technology was closing in on the horse. Peace ended the demand for the war horse, and breeders opened the gate and turned them loose. Over the years, the blood of Whalers and heavy horses mixed with stock horses, forming the Brumby herds of today. Research on Brumbies will help form a management plan for Australia's feral horses. While Dave and Will are trying to understand feral horses, they can't help but feel a fondness for the animal with which they spend most of their working lives.
Perennial plants carrying stock. The fences are running, but the creeks are not. There's hope in our hearts, and the future's a promise. And no matter what, you won't take that from us, 'cause this is our land, and this is our life, and this is where we plan to spend it. This is our land, this is our life. It's where it began and it's where we'll end it. To live and work this piece of dirt's more than a part of me.
In song and rhyme, the land and its people have been celebrated. The folk heroes were often bushmen, and the bushmen were often horsemen. And Clancy, you must wheel them. Try and wheel them to the right. Ride boldly, lad, and never fear the spills. And never yet was rider that could keep them on his side if once they gained a shelter of those hills. So Clancy rode to Wheeldon. He was racing on the wing where the best and boldest riders take their place. And he raced his stock horse past them and he made the Rangers ring with the stock whip as he met them face to face. Then they halted for a moment while he swung the dreaded lash. But they saw their well-loved mountains full in view and they charged beneath the stock whip with a sharp and sudden dash and off into the mountain scrub they flew. Reached the mountain's summit, even Clancy took a pull.
Let him go.
That well might make the boldest hold their breath. The wild hop scrub grew thickly, and the hidden ground was full of wombat holes, and any slip was death. But the man from Snowy River let the pony have his head, and he swung his stock whip round and gave a cheer, and he raced him down the mountain like a torrent down its bed while the others stood and watched in very fear. He sent the flintstones flying, but the pony kept his feet. He cleared the fallen timber in his stride, and the man from Snowy River never shifted in his seat. It was grand to see that mountain horseman ride. Small mobs of mountain Brumbies live scattered along the Great Dividing Range. Unlike the outback, the eastern ranges have reliable rain, permanent water and abundant grass. Across the country, as spring breezes stir, the mating urge of horses is aroused. Weeks after giving birth, mares come into season again. Harems vary in size from one mare to many. A very dominant stallion may be able to hold as many as 10 mares. Stallion serves all females in his harem as soon as they are sexually mature.
Wild horses throughout Australia tend to behave in a similar fashion, no matter whether they're up on the alpine mountains or out on the arid flats. Mares come in season about once a month during the spring, and they'll accept a stallion for about 4 or 5 days while they're in season. Once the stallion's done his job and the mare's in foal, it takes about 11 months before the foal is born. in good condition. Over 80% of mares will be in foal. So it's possible for a mare to have one foal every year if she's got enough food about.
The prehistoric horse lived among wolves, big cats and bears. Its survival depended on its ability to run. Even in this land without predators, the foal has a strong instinct to struggle to its feet. "20 minutes after it is born, the foal is standing. 3 hours later, it will be capable of a wobbly gallop. Within a day, it will run like the wind." As soon as a foal is up and running, they reunite with the stallion, where they have the protection of the herd. In the high country, Brumbies retreat to remote wilderness, the very areas set aside for national parks. Jenny Dyering and assistant Ian Household are studying the impact of feral horses in alpine parks.
It's quite good. Big. In 125 years of grazing, horse and cattle hooves have compacted and chopped up the fragile, porous areas, and now there's far fewer plants and animals in those areas.
Stagnant at one stage.
They tend to trample the soft, boggy areas and break the plants, and they allow weeds to invade along the tracks. I'm measuring the compaction of the soil and the effect of this compaction on plant diversity. By counting the number of horses going along the track, we correlate the number of horses with the amount of impact on the track.
Almost there. Okay, she's up now.
I aim
That's
to
it?
estimate the Brumby numbers in the park to see if they're increasing or decreasing.
Yep.
In Central Australia, there is no doubt. The population of wild horses is on the increase.
There's 200,000 horses in the Northern Territory. During good seasons, there might be another 30 or 40,000 foals.
Throughout Australia, Brumbies can increase by as many as 150,000 each year. As horse numbers build up, there is more pressure on the environment, especially around waterholes. Unlike all the native grass-eating animals, horses are hard-hooved and cause erosion of fragile rangelands.
Horses spend 70 or 80% of their time grazing, right through the night and the day. whereas cattle spend about 50% of their time grazing. So they travel further into the hills and further away from water than cattle, selecting the most palatable grasses. So the vegetation that grows in Australia now has to support horses, rabbits, cattle, donkeys, camels, goats, as well as all the native animals.
Horses, along with all these feral animals, are eating the heart out of Australia. A third of all mammal species of the arid regions have become extinct since livestock were introduced. Brumby, through no fault of its own, is now an outlaw on the run. The helicopter pilot has replaced a stockman for Mustering.
The Conservation Commission want to get horses off the national parks and reserve those areas for the native plants and animals. Pastoralists are interested in removing horses from their land because they compete with the cattle for feed. Quite often the stallion will see the helicopter as another stallion trying to pinch his mares, and he will try to run the mares away from the chopper. During a muster, the yards are set up near a gap in the hills. The horses are run through the gap and are guided by the wing fences into the gate. Horses are pretty smart, and when they feel they're being run into a yard, they try to escape. However, the helicopter can usually cover most of the moves of the horses.
Every harem group has a lead mare. If she is headed into the yard, the others follow.
Although the helicopters are very good at mustering and they can cover large areas, they always miss at least some horses. After trying to keep control of his mares for 15 kilometres, Black Stallion at the last possible moment sees his chance and escapes under the chopper, leaving his mares to be run into the yard.
Brumbies have pushed long distances. They arrive at the yards hot and agitated. In the confusion, social groups are mixed. Stallions feel threatened if other males are near their mares, and fighting breaks out. The horses will be trucked away. Being wild animals, they don't travel well. They are hosed to cool off, watered, fed, then left overnight to settle down. The Brumbies have a 500-kilometre journey ahead, destined for the abattoir. They end up in restaurants of Europe and Japan. Ross Bryan works for the Conservation Commission on feral animals. In his spare time, he breeds, trains and races horses. He has an intimate knowledge of the way of horses. He's lived close to them all his life, but is caught in the dilemma of Australia's feral horse problem. For a horse lover, he probably has the worst job on earth. All feral animals are culled in national parks. Ross Bryan has the job of culling the Brumbies.
I hate to see any animal hurt, and particularly horses, because they're my first love. But I know, and you've got to realise that it has to be done. And if it has to be done, it has to be done by trained people. And it's a field that I've been trained in, and I feel that I do it to the best of my ability. Which, and repeating myself, no, I don't like it, but I know it has to be done.
By far the greatest killer of Brumbies is drought.
Dry and stony, this land can be lonely. We're starting to own me, and it's oh so strong. Wind burnt and dusty, I think that it must be a piece of heaven gone a little bit wrong. The earth's as colourful as the sky is when the sun hits the distant plain, and all the clouds are only liars. Will it ever rain again?
There's been 4 years without any summer rainfall and about 8 months without any rain at all. The horses and the cattle eat all the grass close to permanent water. It means that any animal that has to drink at the waterhole has to walk much further to get a feed. Most of the good food gets eaten, and all that remains are poisonous plants. In Central Australia there's a plant that causes Birdsville's disease when horses eat it. A horse suffering from this disease drags its back legs, can't walk nearly as far as a healthy horse, and therefore is forced to eat more and more poisonous plants. Even after 8 months with no rain, the cattle maintain pretty good condition by eating the trees and herbs, whereas the horses who require grass are in very poor condition. During really dry times, I've seen horses walking up to 50 kilometres from a waterhole to get a feed. Overpopulation and diminishing food supply during drought, because the horses and cattle have eaten it all, also cause the native animals to become poor and perhaps die of starvation.
If Brumbies are removed from the land, but are merely replaced by cattle, the natural environment will be no better off.
When water becomes scarce, the horses dig holes in the sand and the water soaks into the holes. It takes a little while for it to soak in, so horses take longer to get a drink. Therefore, more groups are present at the water hole at the same time than when water is freely available. On one very dry day, I counted 300 horses at a water hole, waiting their turn to have a drink. More confrontation between stallions. Horses are not the only ones who use these water holes. There's kangaroos and all the wildlife have to get a drink. They have to spend a fair bit of time getting a drink in this way, perhaps an hour or 2 hours instead of 15 minutes. This cuts down the time that they have to find food. To have a drink, they travel out to where they get a feed. They're still a bit hungry probably, and they get thirsty again. They come in for a drink. They go out and get food again. They get into this vicious circle. If the water hole then dries up, by the time they get to the water hole, they're totally parched and they just can't travel any further. Their condition gets lower and their wounds don't heal as well. Not all horses lose condition at the same rate. The horse that's able to bully the others and get them away from the water, drink quicker and get to the best feeding place first, will survive. A stallion who has mares is defending them, keeping other stallions away from the mares when he comes in to drink. He's going to lose condition quicker than a stallion that has no mares.
As dominant stallions weaken themselves fighting, young bachelors have a better chance of taking their mares.
Even mares will push foals away from water. Probably the first to go during the drought are the young foals who just can't walk the great distances that the horses have to walk to get a feed. Their mothers just leave them there. Probably saves the mare's life. By leaving the foal at the water hole, the mare has a chance to breed again.
The only winners of drought are the predators who feed off the victims. Unlike the native animals, horses haven't had millions of years to adapt to this land and climate. Along all the dry watercourses, Brumbies hang on in quiet desperation, pawing at the hot sand for some sign of moisture. Starving and thirsty Brumbies languish at their familiar watering spot, too weak to walk in search of water. They suck at dry sand, at the memory of the pool from which they last drank. As the horses suffer, the land suffers with them, stripped of anything edible for many kilometres around the dried watercourses. In a prolonged drought, thousands of Brumbies perish. Even where water remains, Brumbies die of starvation. A foal drowns in the heat of drought. The smell of death and foul water deters other horses from drinking.
A waterhole full of dead horses is putrid. At times I've counted up to 70 horse carcasses at one waterhole.
A foal born in drought dies in drought. It never felt raindrops on its back. Within hours of the foal's death, life-giving rains begin to fall. The storm brings over 50 millimetres of rain, more than in the past year. The flash flood sweeps away the Brumby carcasses and the stench of death. Waterholes are replenished and rain brings life back to the desert. Within days, new grass will save the surviving horses. As they recover, Brumbies will seek each other out to breed again. In spite of nature's cruel cull of wild horses, with a couple of good years, their numbers build up and control operations begin again. The horse was brought to this land as loyal servant and friend, and abandoned to run wild. Breeds up in good seasons, but suffers terribly in drought. Our dilemma is to find a merciful solution for the Brumby, the land, and the native animals. In this muster, more than 300 horses are rounded up and driven towards the yards. The wing fence goes down and the Brumbies head for the hills. You must wheel them. Try and wheel them to the right. Ride boldly, lad, and never fear the spills. For never yet was rider that could keep the mob in sight if once they gain the shelter of those hills. And they halted for a moment while he swung the dreaded lash. They saw their well-loved mountains full in view, and they charged beneath the stockwhip with a sharp and sudden dash, and off into the mountain scrub they flew.
It'd be almost impossible to wipe out all the wild horses in Australia because they're very hard to catch. There'll always be one that gets away, or two. Only someone who's ridden a great horse or had a great horse as a friend would would understand the feeling that a horseman has for a horse. I have one horse that would probably die for me. He's probably my best mate, I don't know.